Good morning and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Gil Herrera, Director of Research, NSA. Now, please welcome INSA Vice President of Policy, Bishop Garrison.
Good morning and welcome to our program. This morning we are pleased to host one of the community's top leaders for the final of 3 installments of our Data and Quantum Computing series sponsored by Microsoft. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the questions box to the right of your screen. We have over 400 registrants for today's event. And so I will do my best. Sometimes it can be difficult, but we'll do our best to get to all your questions. And we're pleased to welcome members of the press to this call. This is a reminder that this program is on the record and it is being recorded. And finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our host sponsor, Microsoft, for their continued support of these programs. We could not deliver this kind of quality thought leadership without the support of our sponsor partners. Here to introduce our speaker is Jeff Hedges, Account Director of the National Security Group at Microsoft. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you, Bishop, and thank you, INSA, for holding this morning's discussion. I'm so excited to be here supporting this presentation, as quantum is one of the key focus areas here at Microsoft. As an example, we're pushing the bounds of scientific innovation with Azure Quantum Elements, which marries high-performance computing, AI, and quantum computing into a singular platform posed to drive breakthroughs in cryptology, chemistry, and material sciences, just to name a few. As evidence of our commitment to quantum computing in the intelligence and defense space, Microsoft has entered into a collaboration with DARPA. This partnership is dedicated to creating a utility-scale quantum computer utilizing topological qubits, renowned for their error protection, speed, control, and reliability. This project aims to build a quantum computer that can tackle significant challenges that are currently beyond the capabilities of classical computers, with potential applications spanning intelligence, defense, and other vital sectors. We're also helping quantum researchers make quantum a reality through our Copilot feature within Azure. By harnessing natural language, researchers can quickly and efficiently generate calculations, query data, and receive guided answers. This will help in learning both about quantum computing and crafting code for Azure's quantum computers. We're really looking forward to seeing what Mr. Herrera's team and the rest of the community will do with these capabilities. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Mr. Gil Herrera serves as the Director of Research for NSA. The Research Directorate conducts world-class scientific research to develop new and innovative techniques and technologies to enable the signals intelligence and cybersecurity missions of NSA and Central Security Service, as well as joint authority missions of the intelligence community and Department of Defense. Mr. Herrera joined NSA after serving nearly 40 years at Sandia National Laboratories, where his last assignment was a laboratory fellow, one of only 15 such appointments in Sandia's 70-year history. In 2020, he was appointed to the U.S. National Quantum Initiative Advisory Committee, which advises the nation's highest offices on matters concerning quantum information science. He is a fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science and a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Gil Herrera.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. And to your audience, I must first say, I do own more than one tie. This tie is subtly different than the one in the image, you know, rest assured. So I do have more than one tie. And indeed at NSA, they do not require you to wear uniforms. So let me start off by saying that.
Fantastic. And thank you, Gil, again for joining us. We really appreciate your expertise and thought leadership on this, tackling a difficult conversation like this around quantum computing. So with that said, if we could just kind of set a foundation for the conversation, could you just provide a little general description of what exactly quantum computing is?
Yeah, certainly. And you'll hear a lot of different versions of what a quantum computer is and what a qubit is. And the first thing I want to say is that all of them are wrong, but just subtly wrong, because it's really difficult to explain what a quantum computer is, because it gets into the weird, spooky world of quantum mechanics. And to make a computer out of it that we could understand, we've got to ultimately make it talk in the kind of language that we talk, which are regular bits. So just with that as a caveat, I'll give you my version of it. But I first need to start off to explain what a classical computer is, and how we've evolved to where we are. There have been types of computation going back to the days of when people would tie knots, or an abacus is a form of a computer. The computers used to calculate ballistic trajectories in World War II were analog computers. But what we think of a computer today was really due to the work of a couple of people. One was George Boole, a mathematician in the 19th century England, who first established Boolean algebras. It's basically the algebras of 1 and 0s. Followed later by a gentleman who I consider to be perhaps the most influential scientist, other than Einstein, of the 20th century, Claude Shannon, who both turned Boolean logic, in the world's most famous master's thesis, into the logical gates that we use today in computing, and or exclusive or not, that type of thing, and also crafted an information theory. And he didn't define a bit, but a colleague did. And a bit is one bit of information in Shannon space. So that's how we do computation today. Now, the reason why a quantum computer is so attractive is it's not limited to just being in a 1 state and a 0 state. You can put it into something called the superposition, where it represents all states. Now, here's where it gets a little bit cagey about what a qubit is. You'll often hear people say that it is a 0, 1 at the same time. That's technically not accurate. What's kind of accurate is to say it's a probability wave function in Hilbert space that could be anywhere from 1 to -1 normalized, including in imaginary space, right? And so you really don't know what that is. But what a qubit is, and the reason why it's so powerful, is when you put it into this superposition state, it can have a Shannon information content of 2. So you kind of double the information that's theoretically available, per qubit. And why that's important is when you start putting them in superposition of a number of qubits. So instead of increasing an information volume, by this, by doubling for every qubit, or sorry, by adding for every qubit, you're taking it to the exponent. So if you have 1,000 qubits in superposition, that's 2 to the 1,000th power, and it's this huge amount of information. And so that's what makes it so attractive. But there are a lot of limitations to it, one of which being is, even though when you put these qubits into a superposition of a whole bunch of states, once you read it, it collapses into just one binary state. We force it to be 1s and 0s when we measure it. And so the process of making a quantum computer work is really the artful choreography of making these qubits, before you measure them, go through a number of operations, called gates, that don't constitute a measurement, but that ultimately will yield the right answer. And that's when you exploit other aspects of quantum mechanics besides superposition, such as entanglement. That means making the state of different qubits effectively be linked. It also, and the important one that people usually forget to talk about, is interference. That's how you constructively or destructively interfere these qubits as a way to help you converge on an answer. And interference, if you remember the wave experiment, where you have can demonstrate that particles that go to a slit will go through both sides, and then with demonstrating the probabilistic wave function will either create lines or spaces caused by interference patterns. So that's effectively what a quantum computer is. The challenge is they're exceptionally difficult to make and to program. And why is that? if you look at the first computer that relied upon transistors and switches, and it was actually binary in operation, the ENIAC, it mainly had vacuum tubes, not transistors. The error rate was on the order of 10 to the minus 15th. And so you can actually run a calculation of the day in that period of time. If you look at a modern high performance computer, the error rate, and I didn't say failure rate in both cases, the error rates are on order 10 to the minus 28, 10 to the minus 30. Sounds like a big number, but when you have, billions, even hundreds of billions of transistors running at a few gigahertz, then it gets short pretty quickly. And that's why in high performance computing, you have to do checkpoint reset and other kind of error mitigations. But with a quantum computer, the best qubits today have error rates that are on order of 10 to the minus 2. So 1% error rate. So very quickly you run into this problem of errors, and that was what the challenge of analog computing was. So that kind of in a nutshell is what a quantum computer and a qubit are. It's a way to take advantage of this vastly greater amounts of information, but you're doing so with a very, very fragile computer that requires extensive error correction. And that's why we don't have a practical quantum computer today.
Understood. That is just an amazing kind of history on the technology overall. So I guess my next question in this would be, as NSA, understanding the background and the approach to it, how has NSA's approach to quantum computing evolved over the years as the technology has evolved, and what milestones have you been able to mark throughout this journey?
Yeah, many people don't know this, but the National Security Agency was integral to the foundation of the field of quantum computing engineering, engineered quantum systems. So there was an NSA employee at the conference when Peter Shor gave his paper. So let me back off a little bit and talk a little bit about the history of quantum computers and then how NSA plays into it. So arguably, quantum computers were first posited by Richard Feynman in a lecture around 1980, where he was talking about the simulation of molecules and of atoms. And he was at Caltech at the time, and that was at the start of something called density functional theory, where people were really thinking about how do we simulate atoms. And it's the way we simulate molecules and design materials and even pharmaceuticals today, but it's a simulation. And he made the statement that basically you're going to need to have a quantum computer, something at the atomistic level, to simulate quantum states. And then that led others in the field, David Deutsch and others, to start positing how you would go about making a quantum computer. And people were searching for applications other than using a quantum computer to do this materials or atomistic simulations. But then something happened in the mid-90s. A gentleman named Peter Shor came up with an idea. Earlier in the year, he and a collaborator came up with an algorithm for how you could do Fourier analysis, Fourier transforms, which really looks at the periodicity of signals, and found a way with a quantum computer to do the Fourier analysis. And Peter, being just one of the most brilliant mathematicians in the country, thought, if we could do this periodicity analysis, I think I could find a way to do factoring. And so he published a paper and presented at this conference about how you could use this theoretical quantum computer to factor, to find the primes of very large numbers. And why that's important is because about 20 years before that, there was an algorithm developed called RSA, which relies upon a hard problem of for encryption, where, and I won't go into the details how public key encryption works, but if you have two really large prime numbers and multiply them, then by keeping one of those primes to yourself and sharing the other, there's a way you could encode information where you can give out your public key and then encode information in a key exchange. And so you could securely communicate with people that you don't know. In the past, the way you'd have to encrypt information is with pre-shared keys. So public key was a really big deal. And what Shor indicated was there might be a way to crack this encryption, whereas before it was thought to be an intractable problem with a quantum computer and this algorithm that it might work. And there was an NSA employee in the audience and went to talk to Peter, and with surprising speed, in less than a year later, the National Security Agency, through the Laboratory for Physical Sciences, a joint University of Maryland National Security Agency Research Institute, had a broad agency announcement on the street on quantum computing. So NSA has been funding academic and industrial quantum computing research going back to the mid-90s. And quite frankly, most of the major advances in quantum computing have their roots in work funded by NSA. The transmon qubit that most of the big industry players, like IBM and Google are using, was actually funded by work at NSA at Yale University. We have major programs, at many universities, including Yale. The theory of linear quantum optics, which is most of the photonics-based approaches, was actually invented through NSA funding. Australia is very big into this. It's a silicon-based approach to quantum computing, where you implant, an atom, typically phosphorus, in a silicon matrix. And there are other methods that are used, quantum dots. Those were, funded through NSA research. In fact, the Kane trap is what most of the Australian teams use, and Kane works at LPS, right? And so we really funded a lot of this work over the course of the past, close to 30 years. We have funded many hundreds, if not into the thousands, of PhD students in quantum and related fields, and many postdocs. And so we've been funding this work for years. And you might ask, why would we try to fund something that could break the internet? Because if we don't understand what the state of the technology is, then we can't inform policymakers as to when to you need to evolve to a type of encryption or encryption schemes that will not fall prey to Shor's algorithm.
Yeah, no, and that's a fantastic point. It kind of leads to right into my next question. So you mentioned encryption. You mentioned that the potential of unforeseen events, the potential of something like a black swan occurrence, for instance, as you and I offline have discussed previously. Can you elaborate on why there is such a high need for quantum-resistant cryptography at this particular moment, given the technology?
Yeah, and keep in mind, I've just a little bit ago told you how difficult it is to make a qubit in a quantum computer, and that today nobody has one that I'd call useful. We've had a supremacy experiment, but that was a toy problem, and people found ways that maybe it wasn't as supreme as was claimed. But there could be a black swan event. There are a lot of teams trying a lot of different technologies, and somebody may crack the nut. And if they do so, then we're at great jeopardy for how we manage today's modern economy. Like if you're old like me, you can remember when, if you used a credit card, because they did exist, they had this piece of paper and they put your card there and they take a imprint of it using paper. Yeah. And an entirely paper-based system. But and so credit cards weren't really used that much. Now, almost all transactions, you don't see money anymore because we have this public key encryption system. And so our economy, world economy, but especially in the US, is vulnerable, because if that was broken, then these transactions that occur every day just couldn't exist anymore. Now, where it really makes a difference, though, is there's a lot of information, particularly in the national security space, that is a lot more vulnerable than these transactions I described, because technically we can still go back to this carbon system and different kinds of transactions, and banks can protect their transactions between banks and whatnot. But it's recorded information. People can record information that is encrypted and wait for the day that you could break the encryption. And there are huge vulnerabilities, and that those vulnerabilities aren't only for places like the government, right? If we, and I'll use an example from my prior life at Sandia, there are encryption methods that are used, or there are ways that we can communicate with our various partners in nuclear weapon production where public key encryption is utilized to share keys. And now what if somebody's recorded that information and they crack it? They may, in the future, they may be able to find information for things like weapon systems that have very long lifetimes. The B-51 bomber was, designed, well over or about 70 years ago, and it's still going to be, deployed for at least another 20 years. And so there are parts of national security information that has a long lifetime. But how valuable is your child's social security number, right? Or I just had a grandchild, they're gonna have a social security number. If somebody had that number, then that has a lifetime, hopefully of 80, 90, 100 years, right? So there's, how about your account number? I have the same account number I had in my bank, since I opened up my present account in like 1981. So there's some classes of information, even within the public sector and for private individuals that have very, very long lifetimes. And so that's why the threat of a quantum computer isn't just the prompt or immediate effect, but it's a potential impact with this recorded information. And there are other reasons why we're warning. It's not just the immediacy of this threat, because it may not be immediate. It may take another 10 years, it may take another 20 years. It may take forever for a quantum computer to really be realized, because it's a difficult problem and a cryptanalytically relevant. That means a quantum computer that could break RSA has to be really, really big. The best published estimates are in the tens of millions of what are called physical qubits to make what's called an error-corrected logical qubit. And if you're interested, I could explain what that means in a bit. But if this black swan event happens, then we're really screwed. So, and what is NSA doing about it? One thing NSA has done about it is we actually started research in quantum resistant algorithms not too long after we started funding academic programs to come up with what a quantum computer would look like. And so we have a lot of maturity within the NSA. We have been deploying quantum resistant encryption in certain key national security applications for a while now. We support NIST in whatever manner they want in the development of their algorithms. And NIST did come up with a competition, for quantum resistant algorithms that have already been published. And so the tools are already out there. If you Google NSA post-quantum, then you'll come up with a website, because we have a website where we go into a lot of detail about the post-quantum algorithms with a lot of arguments about why you need to make the transition. NSM 10, which was a national security memo signed by President Biden, calls for the conversion to happen, within the next roughly 10 years, gives a schedule for that. NIST has the algorithms. And so, that transition needs to start today. NSA has responsibility for national security systems, and we're managing through that, proving out algorithms and validating equipment that comes online for national security purposes. But the private sector needs to do their part and start this transition. Now, one of the reasons why we're so vocal about this is if you look, in the public sector, historically, it takes a long time for these kind of transitions to take place. And a good example of that is with the SHA-1, which was an algorithm that's been around for a long time that is used for basically authentication processes. Like when I see Microsoft behind you, and that when Microsoft pushes an update, then you have to have a credentialing system to make sure that it's pushing it to the right computers and the people have active licenses if that's required, and they are who they say they are and whatnot. There was a known vulnerability in SHA-1 prior to that, found in 2005, SHA-2 replacement had been developed, by 2001, so 4 years in advance of that vulnerability being found. But as late as 2020, SHA-1 was still being used in some applications, right? Even here, so here it is 16 years after known vulnerability, because it's difficult replacing, signatures in the field. Imagine SCADA devices, or think about something as trivial as your Ring doorbell. That has a very lightweight processor, and you may have to, play with algorithms for something that already, doesn't necessarily have a long battery life and has a very lightweight processor. And so there's a lot of resistance to those kind of changes. So we need to start working now, because we know it's going to take a long time. There may be some hardware upgrades that have to go, and data in the field has a long lifetime. Pretty much all the large hyperscalers like yourself started this journey a while ago, particularly with key customers like the financial industry. But all industries need to make these changes, and hopefully I've articulated a strong case. But go, Google or I'm sorry, I should have said search, because there are a lot of ways to search.
That's fair. No, well, one thing I'll say for the reference that you mentioned that's at NSA.gov, our team, thank you, Peggy O'Connor, was gracious enough to go ahead and drop that in the chat for everyone to see. So the folks online here, I can go ahead and go directly to that and reference that cybersecurity post-quantum post and information for industry. So but before we move on to our Q&A from the audience, I did have one more question, because you kind of started hitting it there around scalability within the quantum realm. And can you just kind of briefly explain the significance of memory and scalability within quantum? I mean, you've kind of already hit it a bit, talking about the future and history and how this technology is going to continue to expand, but do memory and scalability pose significant challenges to the advancement of quantum, and how is NSA's overall research being worked to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, let me do it in reverse order, because memory is kind of a hard thing, because there's not, it's a hard corollary to classical memory. But with scalability, I mentioned a little bit ago about, the error rates in transistors, in modern applications being about 10 to the minus 28, and the error rates of qubits being about 10 to the minus 2. That's where the scalability challenges really emerge, because going back to Shannon, who I mentioned, information theory is as relevant to quantum computing as it is to classical computing and communication. That's why they call it QIS, right? Quantum information science. It's all about the information. And qubits are prone to errors, and they die pretty quickly. Keep in mind that most qubits are held at near absolute zero, negative 459.6 degrees Fahrenheit, on the order of, tens of millikelvin, because they need to be isolated from the environment, because they're so susceptible to interference from the environment. I mentioned, once you do a measurement, then the wave function collapses. Interacting with the environment is a collapse. In the case of ion trap computers, where they're effectively, atoms that are suspended in a matrix, they have them on the order of 10 to the minus 11, 10 to the minus 12 torr. That's several orders of magnitude more vacuum than deep space. So they can't interact with the environment. So you really worry about error mitigation strategies. And Peter Shor's second paper in the mid-90s was a means to do error correction. So the scalability limitations of quantum computing is largely around how you do error correction. And to do error correction, you have to have very large numbers of qubits. And there is like a theoretical threshold of, you have to get to about 3 nines fidelity, or like a 10 to the minus 3 error rate before you can even do error correction. But if you're close to that point, it requires hundreds to thousands of qubits to make one logical qubit. So logical qubit means an error corrected physical qubit. And the better the fidelity you get, I mean, that's the basis of the strategy that Microsoft has that was mentioned, right? But topologically protected gates is they're once realized will likely have a much better than 10 to the minus 3 error rate. Other technologies may be a little bit harder to get there, but these technologies actually exist in real life circuits. And topological is, you've made a lot of progress. We're still working on that. And so you have to have a whole bunch of qubits working in concert with each other, running error correction strategies before you can make qubits that are good enough to execute an algorithm. And so, like I mentioned, the ENIAC having a 10 to the minus 15 error rate. So if you want to run a problem worthy of the ENIAC, like the first computer that did ballistic calculations, and that's about what you need to run Shor, then you have to be around that 10 to the minus 15 error rates. And so that's really the trauma scalability, is to run Shor. The best published paper has on order a little bit more than 2 times the key size. So you'd have to be close to 5K logical qubits corrected to about 10 to the minus 15. That'll require tens of millions of physical qubits, and therein lies the challenge, right? It's really, really hard to scale to that level. Memory is a whole nother issue, and what this speaks to is why quantum computers, I argue, are really not going to be universal computers. Because unlike classical computers, where all memory has to be is something that when you interrogate it, either has 0 volts or 1 volts, or a small current or no current, or it could be a ton of things, right? When I was a kid, memory were these little ferromagnets that were hand woven in core memory. Memory can be a transistor, memory can be a switch. There's a lot of things that memory can represent itself in classical computing. The problem with quantum memories is it has to represent, this, wave function. And so quantum memory today has to be another qubit. And I already mentioned how difficult it is to make a lot of qubits and then to correct the errors in them. So for today, a quantum memory is really a qubit. There are photonics approaches that are different, and the corollary to those is for people who are really old can remember they used to use mercury and hit a wave in mercury as a memory delay function, right? And that's kind of like the way the photonic memories are. There are smart people working on trying to make a quantum memory. It's a great research topic, but we don't have that today. And so that's why if you look at another application for quantum computing, which is Grover's search algorithm, you don't get exponential speed up. It's more like a square or square root speed up. It's good for quantum computer is good for search, but not for sort, because of the memory problem.
So the 2 big things you just hit on as I go into this, our first question from the audience. And again, people audience, please keep bringing them. It sounds like you guys have a lot of great questions out there. Quantum memory, and then the sorting issue. So those sound like 2 issues that would be big for NSA and maybe for more broadly for the IC to really delve a little bit deeper into to tackle in terms of research and development. So can you tell us maybe if that is the case, how can government and industry and academia continue to work collaboratively driving quantum research forward, and what role does each sector kind of play in this? Can you hit on that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. And what I would refer people there to is there was an act passed that is now in the process of being reauthorized, the National Quantum Initiative Act. And within that, I was appointed to be on the National Quantum Initiative Advisory Board when I was still at Sandia, and then reappointed after I came back to NSA. But that really, through the act and through the White House Office of Science and Technology, who manages it, is where this coordination and does. And I actually brought with me, I was an author of this report, but I wanted to make sure I didn't mess up on the 9 recommendations. And here's how government can work together. First and foremost, our committee recommended reauthorizing and appropriating the National Quantum Initiative Act. I'd mentioned before that NSA had been funding research for a long time in quantum computing, and it added up to a lot of money, over the course of 20 years. After this act was funded, the Department of Energy kind of blew by us in terms of the volume of funding. They created, 5, very strong centers. The National Science Foundation got in the act. The Department of Defense did. You mentioned earlier some of the work you're doing with them, but reauthorize and fund the act, because this is not an NSA thing. This is an all-government thing. We advocate fundamental research. It's fun to make tons of qubits, but if they're not very good, then you can't do a lot. And there's a lot of basic research challenges that need to be resolved. We believe there's a role in industry, government partnerships. And in fact, NSA does fund industry. NSA even funds, I think it's 11 academic institutes that are outside of the United States, because this is really a global challenge. But we advocate the public-private partnerships, and pretty much all of the DOE facilities have both government and private sector funding in collaboration. We believe the government has a role in trying to help establish supply chains within the United States. There is a role for international collaboration because there are smart people all over the country. We also believe, though, that some of our the R&D within the United States needs to be protected, and there could be appropriate protections, for which is commercially viable. I already mentioned the supply chains. We also, the last two are about the workforce, because we need to have a strong quantum workforce, and the committee both advocated STEM education, coming up with special curriculum, not only for the quantum physicists, but also for quantum engineering, the cold engineering, how you control these qubits because they're really finicky, algorithm or rhythmic work on the computer science side, but also that, we're bringing in a lot of foreign graduate students, and if you look at a lot of our tech companies, they're headed by people who once were foreign nationals and chose, because the United States is the best place to live in, to become US citizens and contribute. And so we strongly encourage that we try to retain the foreign talent that were educated in our universities. And, like most of their predecessors, they elected to become US citizens and contribute to the United States. And we actually had that as a strong recommendation. And so it's a tough problem. It takes the world's best talent, and we need all the world to contribute to these fields.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. So another set of audience questions. I'm going to try to combine these, one from Sydney and one from Alan. So they have questions about PQC algorithms. And to the extent you can actually discuss this, of course, and it's not classified in any way, but has NSA deployed any type of PQC algorithms in operation yet, or is it still opposed to treat them more so as experiments and in the testing phases? In terms of what's deployed today, will they still suffer from a future black swan event similar to kind of the RSA threat that you described previously?
Yeah, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's been well over 20 years that NSA initiated internal research on post-quantum algorithms. And so we have deployed some actively in the past, and we already have on our website. So if you go to that website I mentioned, NSA post-quantum, you'll find information on approved algorithms and implementations, that we have recommended. So yeah, on some of the most sensitive national security systems, there's already been deployment, but it's a big lift, right? There's a lot of encryption gear out there. There's a lot of different instantiations for how we use public key. And so it's a long journey, and we will be done in national security space by, I believe it's 2032 with this transition. But yeah, we already have deployed, and there's very good information on the website about what all national security customers need to do in the context of deployment. And now I should make a couple of plugs, though. One plug is for the Cyber Collaboration Center. If you Google NSA Cyber Collaboration Center, if you're a member of the Defense Industrial Base, then you can take advantage of the center. And if you sell coffee to the government, right, to the DOD, I should say, or a pencil or a computer, then you're part of the defense industrial base. You don't have to be a big giant defense contractor. You know, if you do work with the DOD, you're part of the DIB, and you can take advantage of the services. And there's a lot of information that they have about the post-quantum transition. And so I would encourage you to take advantage of that.
No,
And
that's fantastic.
future black swans, you know, we've done a lot of testing because we've been testing for over 20 years. And we believe that the algorithms that we're deploying will be resilient to a quantum attack, certainly to shore attack. You never know when a black swan is going to happen. You know, maybe somebody will find the Ark of the Covenant I think it's in a warehouse somewhere.
Last we checked.
That'll be the secret. But yeah, we believe that the post-quantum methods we developed are resilient.
So we've got roughly about 2 minutes left for one more question. It comes from Bruce Friedman. He asks, how many logical states can a qubit resolve to? Is this different than using unsaturated logic, ECL, to increase speed?
Let's see. Oh, well, ultimately, when you do a measurement, it reduces down to one state, right? You know, it's the answer. But the number of states that you could put into in a superposition, you know, is 2 to the n, where n represents how many logical qubits you have. So you could put it into superposition of a huge number of states, the more than the atoms of in the universe. The problem is that it was this orchestration, you know, or choreography that I mentioned. You know, the art of a quantum computer is making it go through these logical gates that have been developed. That if you do a gate operation of entangled states versus another, that's not a measurement. So you can have a one wave function influence another without it being a measurement, you know, as long as you don't actually look at it, right? Ask what the state is. And that's what this development of quantum algorithms are. So there's a lot of methods to take a classical computer and make it perform better than prior algorithms, right? There are a lot of different algorithms, and the one that the person asking the question is one of those. But with a quantum computer, you know, if we could actually make one, huge potential gain. The problem is, you know, this 10 to the -2 versus 10 to the -28 obstacle we have to overcome.
Yeah, fantastic. With that, we're right on time. Gil, thank you so much. Do you have any closing thoughts for the audience? Any big takeaway from the conversation?
Yeah, one more website I didn't tell you about for those interested in doing quantum computing research. Just do a web search on Qubit Collaboratory LPS, or LPS, it's Laboratory for Physical Sciences, Qubit Collaboratory, and that'll be information on how to respond to the broad agency announcement that we have on quantum computing. And again, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been great. And thank you for your thoughtful insights here. It was incredibly informative. I know I learned a lot. I didn't pick it all up. I'm not going to be a quantum computing expert tomorrow. But this was a great introduction and a great overall understanding of how NSA has been leading this conversation and this effort for some years now. And for folks, the link, the website he just mentioned, we just dropped it in the chat again, so you have that one as well. So again, thank you for this very informative discussion. Thank you to Microsoft. Again, our sponsor for sponsoring not only this, but the entirety of our 3-part series on data and quantum computing. And thank all of you for watching and for joining us this morning. When the webinar is over, there will be a short survey that pops up. Please, if you can, take a few moments to complete it and let us know how we're doing. And then just quickly looking ahead, as we often do here, because we have so many amazing events coming up. On Thursday, March 28th, we will hold a leadership dinner with the NGA director, Vice Admiral Frank Whitworth, at the Hilton McLean Tyson's Corner Hotel. So please go to our website and check that out. Following prepared remarks, he will join the Honorable Ellen McCarthy for a discussion focused on Maven and NGA's new responsible AI training program, leveraging commercial GEANT data and analytics, and the agency's new Geospatial Intelligence Information Center, and more. Next up after that is Thursday, April 4th. We will hold a full day symposium focused on how AI is transforming the IC. I work very closely with our Executive VP, John Doyen, on this. We're very excited to help, the entire team is very excited to help bring this to you folks. The programming includes two keynotes, 3 panels, and a series of Ignite rounds with senior leaders from CIA, DIA, NGA, NSA, just to name a few of the 3-letter agencies that are going to be represented in this discussion. You can find a full view of the agenda on our INSA website. And then for those in the Huntsville, Alabama area, or who have colleagues in that region, we will be holding a 2-day program on April 17th and 18th, which will include a job fair, a welcome reception with our keynote speaker, Janice Glover-Jones, Director of Mission Services at DIA, and a classified panel, as we know you folks appreciate those, focused on space and counterspace. Please check our website for the full list of programming. And finally, we recently announced that retired General Paul Nakasone, the former director of NSA and the commander of Cybercom, as our recipient of the 2014 William Baker Award. We expect more than 700 leaders from across intelligence, defense, and national security communities to join us to celebrate General Nakasone's transformative tenure at NSA and CSS and U.S. Cyber Command. This will be a black tie dinner, a gala, that will take place on June 1st at the Omni Showroom in Washington, D.C. We hope you can join us. This concludes our programming for today. Thank you for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of your day and week.